Hello and welcome to So What You're Saying Is. I'm Peter Whittle. Now, on this programme over the past couple of years, basically since 2020, we've talked an awful lot about the way in which our institutions appear to have been taken over by a woke ideology, and indeed the way in which they appear to have been infiltrated. Amongst those institutions, I'd say one of the most prominent has been the National Trust, a great organisation, nearly 6 million members, but it has been subject of controversy for some time. There has now been set up an organisation called Restore Trust, which is aimed at members who are concerned about what's happening to the National Trust. And the director of it is Zewditu Gebreyohanes, and she is with me today. Thank you very, very much for joining us.
Thank you.
First of all, can I ask, we are putting this out on Thursday, which is the 25th of August, not usual for our interviews. There's a reason for that. Can you explain what it is to do with your AGM, isn't it?
Yes, well, the National Trust has its AGM on the 5th of November, and it's a very critical time for us, because that's the chance that members have to voice their concerns with the National Trust, because actually lots of them have been saying we've had lots of concerns about the National Trust, but management isn't listening to us. So the AGM provides a good opportunity for people to vote and therefore make change and bring about much needed reform at the top of the National Trust. But the deadline to become a member in order to vote at the AGM is the 26th of August.
Tomorrow.
So, yeah. Exactly. So that's why it's very important that the message gets out as soon as possible. And
I see. So basically, to become a member,
yes,
or to just renew your membership.
Yes, well,
by the 26th.
Exactly. So if you, in order to be able to vote, which is the only way we can make a difference at the National Trust, we have to be a member by the 26th of August. So anyone who is concerned about the National Trust veering away from its founding aims and ethos, I would really urge them to sign up to the National Trust to become a member by the 26th.
There you go. Now look, you couldn't got it from the horse's mouth there. So by tomorrow, if you're a member, please renew, and if you want to help and want to actually sign up by tomorrow, Friday the 26th. You've been involved in the AGM before, of course, haven't you? You actually had some success there, did you not, last time?
Yes, well, I wasn't personally involved with it because I only started I started as director of Restore Trust in May this year. But yes, last year we did have some success, but this year we're trying very much to get the message out more broadly, because there are still lots of people who haven't heard of us. So it's really, really quite critical to get that message out. As you said, there are almost 6 million members. It's a huge organisation, and lots of the members actually don't know the extent to which things are going wrong in the National Trust. And so when they do hear about it, they're extremely concerned and want to do something about it. So it's actually, the first step is letting people know what's going wrong, and the second step is telling them, helping them know what to do about it to make a difference. I
mean, it's quite close to my heart, really. I mean, in the sense that I've always loved the National Trust. I mean, I was a member, people in my family are members, family membership and things like that. And it's sort of, it was particularly upsetting to see the kind of, some of the things that were coming out of the National Trust. I'm thinking of, without going through the lot, there was the now infamous report about slavery, which was essentially going through all the properties in the National Trust, of which there are about 200, I believe, and essentially saying, well, this one's connected to slavery, this one's connected to slavery, and it brought in houses like Churchill's house. Yes. Really, I mean, with no real connection whatsoever. Isn't that right?
Exactly, and as Charles Moore very brilliantly noted, it sort of conflated slavery with colonialism. When slavery is a moral evil, colonialism is not actually. I mean, you can't conflate the two. They're completely different things. So the Chartwell thing, for instance, was because of Churchill's links to the empire.
Right.
I mean, the British Empire is an entire segment of British history. You can't just write it off. And anyway, I mean, the report, there's so much wrong with it, not least It was written by people who weren't proper historians. It was written by activists who had a clear agenda. It was very biased. But the main thing is it's completely outside the remit of the National Trust.
Yes, yes.
And I mean, the National Trust Act, by which the National Trust was established as a charity, states that its duty is the permanent preservation of the lands and tenements, including buildings, for the benefit of the nation. Lands and tenements that are of sort of beautiful or of historic interest. And so that's, I mean, I don't know how that's related. They're so far removed. And actually, it's not just the woke stuff they're doing. It's also the fact that they're simply not doing that. They're not doing what they've been set up to do. Yeah. With Clarendon Park House, for instance, and we've written about this, but Clarendon Park House, great tragedy, was burned, completely ravaged by fire in 2015. And after 7 years, the National Trust has now announced that it's not going to restore it as it had initially promised, and is instead going to, in their own words, preserve the evocative spaces created by the fire, which essentially means £63 million of insurance money not being spent on restoring the interior of the house, which was sort of Giacomo Leone's sort of masterpiece, really sort of wonderful. And we've got so many examples of buildings which have been burned down and then have been restored, and it creates so many good opportunities for people who have trained in traditional crafts and things. So it's really a huge missed opportunity, very much going against what the National Trust was set up to do. That it was burnt under their watch, so it's their responsibility to restore it to what it was. No signs of proper consultation of members. There was no sort of question put to the members of should we restore or not. But in any case, it's a Grade 1 listed house. Yeah. It sets a very dangerous precedent if the National Trust is saying they're not going to restore, but they are taking the insurance money. When you think it's ludicrous, yeah.
I mean, the thing is, that although you might say, well, that's not to do with the woke agenda, in an odd way, the two go together, because what always characterises institutions which have been taken over by, if you like, a kind of anti-colonial, or the desire to decolonise, all of these things, is that they actually veer right away from what they're meant to do. Also because they don't appear to actually care about what they're meant to do. I mean, there was one quote actually, because I read, Charles Moore has written a lot about Restore Trust.
Yes.
And there's one quote from one writer connected to the National Trust, working with the National Trust, in which it said that, there is the mansion experience is old-fashioned, or
it's
something
outdated,
like that.
Yes,
in other words, these 200 houses, it's not just houses, is it, but the 200 are somehow sort of like not of any interest. The implication is they're not of any interest to the people going. I would have thought this is one of the most popular of British pastimes. Exactly. Isn't it?
Well, exactly, and it would explain why it's the biggest, why it's got almost 6 million members, which is just, it's a huge organisation.
Have the members? I know that they did have a decline in members. What was the effect? Do you happen to know any numbers in terms of how many people decided not to renew and such like as a result of all these things we've had over the past couple of years?
Well, I don't have the numbers, but there was a very large amount of a number of members who left, but we've tried to get them to rejoin, and actually lots of them have been saying we have as a result of Restore Trust, because actually, we need to bear in mind that the National Trust management probably wants the opinionated members to be leaving, because they don't want us to be criticising what they're doing. And so it's very important that we actually stay in if we want to make a difference. The National Trust is so important. We're coming from the perspective that we love the National Trust. We love what it's there. It's such an amazing institution. Yeah. And yet it's been overtaken by, if you look at, we're not criticising the volunteers, so the people, the backbone of the National Trust, the people who are keeping it running and things. It's the National Trust management who are leading it astray. And so the only way we can affect change at the very top of the National Trust, and is by voting and therefore by saying members.
There's been so much that's happened with the National Trust. It's hard to actually to enumerate every single case. I would say one of the most important was that there was the chairman, Tim Parker.
Yes.
This is before you were director of the Restore Trust, who effectively, was he forced to resign? I mean, he said something about Black Lives Matter, which seemed remarkably naive to me. He sort of said that we support them because they are a non-party political organisation about human rights. Well, every part of that statement is wrong, actually. But what is the National Trust chairman doing even saying that? This was apparently something he said at a meeting?
Yes, no, exactly. Well, Tim Parker did, I think it's fair to say, resign because of, as you say, this was before my time, but because of Restore Trust's pressure. And it was out of place to say to put forward any statement on Black Lives Matter, which was a political movement, which is a political movement, and which in any case has absolutely nothing to do with the National Trust. I mean, it's sort of the National Trust shouldn't be pronouncing on anything whatsoever that isn't part of that founding duty to preserve for the benefit of the nation lands and tenements of historic interest or beauty. So the thing is, anything outside of that is just outside the remit of the National Trust.
Apparently, the sort of top brass of the National Trust was surprised at the public response to this slavery report. You know, that they were taken aback, which shows that they must live in a kind of bubble, surely.
Well, yes. I mean, the fact that we get thousands of emails from members, from volunteers, or whatever. It's not just on the slavery report, but that's one of the things. I mean, the National Trust management is in denial about the scale of concern from members and from volunteers. So we've got lots and lots, I mean, just sort of thousands and thousands of emails since Restore Trust was set up about these precise things. And then the National Trust says to us, but look, you're just a fringe organisation. Where, I mean, you represent a very tiny sort of, they even have the cheat say sort of far right. I've no idea.
Really?
Well, I mean, it's sort of
that old chestnut.
Yes, but it's. I mean, some of the people who write into us are very clearly, you can tell they're socialists and annoyed by, for instance, £63 million just being used without any transparency about how it's being used. Or, you know, it's completely non-partisan. There is nothing right-wing about saying that a charity should be run according to its charitable objects. It's just so clearly an objective statement which anyone should agree with. And actually our supporters reflect that.
Well, how many supporters do you have? How many members of?
We don't have membership.
Just supporters.
We have over 18,000 on our mailing list.
Really?
Yes. And so that sort of gives a bit of indication about, but that's just the mailing list. And of course we get huge we get lots of people on Twitter and Facebook and things engaging with us, and Instagram as well and things. So there are lots of people, but actually quite a lot of people haven't heard about us, which is why it's very good to get media coverage and sort of go on these.
You do people have to pay something?
No,
they don't. So
no. Well, the newsletter is free, and actually I'd urge people to sign up to it because we get all our information out through there. If anything's going wrong, or if there's something that we need to bring to members' attentions, or any voting information, for instance, for the AGM things, everything's done. We put everything out on the newsletter.
And so, right, if people want to, sign up to the newsletter, what is it? Restore Trust? What is the
www.restoretrust.org.uk.
.org.uk. Restoretrust.org.uk. I would really, encourage you to do that. When you look at the people who've been making decisions, you mentioned the volunteers earlier. These volunteers, the image drawn, I know, from every part of the community, but I remember going along, and they were always extremely devoted people giving up their time.
Yes.
And you thought really the backbone, actually, of the whole thing. But they've sort of been treated rather badly, haven't they? I mean, some of the things they've been asked to do or say, for example, could you give us some idea of that?
Well, one of the examples was the the thing of being made to wear lanyards, for instance, at Felbrigg Hall, which is, I mean, you shouldn't impose anything on people. You shouldn't tell them, look, sort of wear a rainbow lanyard, or otherwise you'll be sort of sent to the back rooms, or whatever,
this is for the LGBT.
Exactly. That's just one example. That's an early example, and of course they backtracked as soon as this came to light, because it's just unfair. But now they've also quite recently brought in some training, which is sort of called everyday inclusion, and so every volunteer must do this. It's mandatory, otherwise you sort of essentially get sacked. And lots of, I mean, I can't tell you actually how many volunteers from all across the country have written in saying this is extremely patronising. I've been working with the Trust for decades. I mean, if it was health and safety training, it makes sense, or whatever, but everyday inclusion training.
What would that actually entail? I mean, is it a bit like unconscious bias training?
Yes. It's all of that stuff. Yeah. And again, I mean, it's just ridiculous. It's the fact that they don't respect these people who have been giving freely of their time to the Trust for decades often. And actually, there are also small things. I mean, people have been writing into us saying the National Trust used to put on summer picnics for us, you know, just small things, or they used to have biscuits in the kitchens. They used to be appreciative of the stuff that they're doing, of the volunteers were doing, because they are, after all, giving freely of their time. They're not getting any pay for it or whatever. And now they've said that sort of appreciation in the last few years has just stopped, and they don't get any of these summer things, or they don't get biscuits in the kitchens, or there's nothing done for them. There's no sign of actually thank you very much for all the hard work you're putting in. And instead of that, they're actually becoming more demanding in a way, saying things like, oh, we'd rather you work on this slot rather than another slot. You know, you can't just, when someone's doing doing something in their free time, you can't sort of demand that they do it at a certain time or whatever. So it's sort of the opportunistic nature, increasingly opportunistic nature of the management. And I think that comes into a broader trend of national trusts, sort of the National Trust becoming a more commercialised thing. It's all about cutting costs, sort of very bureaucratised. It's the people at the top who have the final say on things. It's not asking the volunteers who have been there for decades or the locals what's best. It's what's in our interests, and whether that's virtue signalling to sort of look good, sort of like brands do often. I mean, the National Trust wasn't founded to do that. It was founded with a clear purpose in mind.
But I mean, you say virtue signalling, and I can see that point. Yeah. It does seem to me, though, that it's a little deeper than that. I mean, when I talk, it's not just the National Trust, you know. I mean, if you look at the British Library or British Museum, is that it's essentially also about the fact that it's being run by people who have a general distaste for actually what they're running. And also, as a result, they also are quite ignorant, actually, of it. I mean, has there been also a decline in the pure academic expertise of the National Trust?
Absolutely. I mean, a couple of years ago, a lot of National Trust specialist curators were laid off with the mass redundancies, and they were all understandably up in arms. I mean, they'd been working on, they were sort of experts on art, historic art, or interiors of historic houses and gardens, and they were all, I mean, they were sacked basically. And then when we raise this, whenever we raise this issue, what we often hear back from the National Trust management is, oh no, you're totally wrong actually, the number of curators has gone up. Yes, it might have gone up in numbers, but the quality, the people they replace them with in larger numbers are not at all, they're not these experts in sort of art history and everything. I mean, we've now got curators of visitor experiences. You can't curate visitor experiences. No, you curate sort of, exactly. tangible objects in sort of houses.
But this is something across the entire, or would you say heritage and creative sector, I suppose? I mean, I now, I don't know about you, but I used to go to a lot of exhibitions,
Yes.
you know. I now sort of think twice. I sort of
Yes.
think, I don't want to go in and be made angry by a new sign or an over-curated exhibition where you're
Yes.
being told what to think. And this has happened with the National Trust, hasn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
you know, totally inappropriate sort of signage, isn't that right? And, you know, putting the emphasis on the wrong things, on political things.
Yes, and deliberately so. I mean, sort of very, sort of to say trendy perhaps, but I mean things like, yeah, I mean just focusing in a very biased way on the negative aspects of something, sometimes even very tenuous. I mean, it's not that they're highlighting this house was built on the proceeds of slavery. It's sort of just, I mean, this is a random example, but sort of the owner of the fifth owner of this house had a plantation.
Yes.
You know, I mean, that's really not, if you're focusing on that thing and you haven't written an entire essay on the history of the house, then it doesn't really make sense actually to hone in on that one topic.
I think, you know,
but I agree that it's very much a heritage sector-wide issue. And actually, before this job, I was head of the History Matters project at Policy Exchange at the think tank.
History Matters.
Yes.
Oh, that was good.
Which was a very good. I mean, that was really highlighting the various issues going on across the heritage world, and we saw things like Churchill College, Cambridge doing their very anti-Churchill series, and we saw Kew Gardens trying to decolonise its plant collections. Things, you know, so it's very much, as you say, it's not at all just the National Trust, but I suppose what makes the National Trust different in a way is that it's a charity.
Yes.
It's a membership organisation, and it's just not being accountable, basically, for the decisions it takes, and it's being run. These decisions, which are hugely unpopular, are being made by a very small section of the.
In fact, you mentioned Kew there.
Yes.
I believe is it the current director who mentioned Kew in relation to the National Trust and said, well, actually, they've been doing it for 8 years. No, they're doing it. We should do it too. We should decolonise too.
Yes, exactly. Yes, I think it was Hilary Brady in her Times, profile, and I did actually. I wrote not long after that. I did mention that in an article I wrote for the Times, and I said that Hilary McGrady talks about the Kew Gardens and how they've been doing this. But actually, the paper that we wrote at Policy Exchange got that scrapped 2 weeks after the critical paper that we wrote at Policy Exchange saying that Kew was going outside its remit in doing all of this. Kew Gardens had to back down and said it was scrapping its decolonisation agenda. So I said, and the National Trust needs to be careful, of course, that it doesn't overstep its remit. And the next day or a couple of days later, Jan Lassik, who's the General Counsel and Secretary of the National Trust, wrote a letter into the Times saying Zewditu is wrong to imply that the National Trust is going outside its remit because the Charities Commission found that the slavery report was within was sort of allowed. Or well, technically, perhaps in a legal sense, what they did with the slavery report wasn't outside the remit. But I think it's very clear for anyone to see, and we won't be fooled, that a slavery report is not helping in any way to fulfil that founding duty of preserving historic houses and gardens and land.
I think it was Charles Moore in his piece in The Spectator about Restore Trust mentioned that the report came out, you know, rather too early. I mean, it was sort of rushed out, and that the trust sort of said, well, we were under great pressure to put it out. Well, pressure from whom, I might ask? I mean, it seems obvious to me that they were using the George Floyd, you know, the murder, to basically somehow, this was their chance to put this out then, when it shouldn't actually have come out for some time or something. Yeah. But from what I can gather, this kind of new agenda in the National Trust has actually been kind of like curdling away there for a few years anyway, hasn't it, before, going back a few years before Black Lives Matter? Well,
yes. The National Trust began to go wrong, I think, with the replacement actually of this is going a few years back, the replacement of specialists with sort of managerial-ish types. And so essentially it has been a recent but actually slightly protracted process of increasing bureaucratisation of the National Trust. But things came to a head in 2020 following the George Floyd thing, because the National Trust, like lots of other institutions in the heritage sector, decided, okay, this is where we make our big thing. And Charles was very right to say that. Why did the report come out so early? Why do you need an interim report? It's not just an irrelevant report. It's why do you have an interim report? I mean, it just doesn't seem to make sense. You either get the report out or you don't. So as you say, it's concerning actually that the National Trust has to sort of bow down to any pressure. It shouldn't be run as sort of a huge charity on that scale with a very clearly set out mission. Shouldn't be swayed by the trends of the time. And it's very wrong that the National Trust management has allowed the charity to be taken over by such trends.
You mentioned there that before this you were sort of in charge of the History Matters project at Policy Exchange. I'm very pleased to hear about Kew. You mentioned Kew Gardens. What other kind of successes came out of that? I mean, because quite often we hear of initiatives such as Restore Trust, but they tend not to be reported on the overall effect they've had. I mean,
well, History Matters was very good. I mean, and very much. I mean, all power to Dean Godson, who is very. I mean,
he's the head of Policy Exchange.
He's the head director of Policy Exchange, and it's very rare actually that the most influential think tank in the UK Policy Exchange. It was very brave of him to step up and say we're going to have a policy unit dedicated to this, because it was very, as you know, very unpopular. But we are very lucky in that actually all of the initiatives we had were successful. So the first one was Churchill College, Cambridge, which I very briefly explained earlier. That Churchill College, Cambridge held a very critical event on Churchill, saying that he was racist, that he deliberately caused the Bengal famine to to kill off large numbers of Indians. We were told that it wasn't of huge importance that the Third Reich was defeated in the Second World War, because actually all that happened was one form of white supremacy was replaced with another, apparently. All of these things. So Andrew Roberts and I wrote a paper sort of dismantling each of these claims and just showing, I mean, how could this happen at one of the leading universities in the country, in the world, I mean, sorry, and at the college named after Churchill, I mean, done in his honour. So that actually, a month or so later, the so-called Churchill Race and Empire Working Group was disbanded.
Oh, right. Okay.
So that was very good. That was one success. Another one was, do you know street names are being changed across the country because of apparent links to slavery or to, as we said, lots of them were very tenuous sorts of things, I mean. And so we wrote a paper which said that street names shouldn't be changed unless people on the street have been asked, and at least 2/3 of people on the street vote for change.
Who lived on the street?
Yes, who lived on the street, or businesses on the street, which actually, I mean, people mostly don't want change to happen. So it wasn't just 2/3 of people who vote, it's 2/3 of people on the street actively want it to be changed. And I'm sure that in cases where street names have been changed, and they're done, by the way, at the moment, they were being done without consulting anyone. So the local council could just say, we're going to change the street name here. So what the paper suggested was that the law should be changed so that they would have to consult, and that was announced in the Queen's speech earlier this year. So that's a success. And Kew Gardens was, of course, a success because that was, I mean, it was very quick actually. Just 2 weeks later, of course, after the media had sort of a few headlines on how silly it was to decolonize plant collections, I think did the trick.
Do you think, therefore, that, dare I say it, but do you think that we've seen the worst of this attack, if you like, on heritage? I suspect not, but you know, you've obviously been completely in the vanguard of the pushback.
Well, I think there's greater awareness of these things, which is always good, because at the beginning people didn't know, the vast majority of people didn't know the extent to which these things were happening, so that's very good. I think we shouldn't be complacent, because there are always things bubbling away. I mean, the National Trust management is still in denial that the things they were doing were wrong. So the thing is, there are lots of institutions. All you need, as we saw with Churchill College, with Kew, is you need to prod them and show them, sort of really actually just show them. Sorry, hold on, what you're doing it doesn't match up with what you're meant to be doing. And then they hopefully stop. With the National Trust, it's been more difficult, but I really hope that at the AGM we can bring about the reform that's needed, because our members' resolutions hope to bring about the governance reform actually that's required to make that happen.
Well, look, I mean, every power to you. It's obviously having an effect, and I mean, I think there's a broader question here as well. Broader point is that it just shows that you should not be sort of fatalistic and just accept what these things that are happening, and if you fight back, it can work. Thank you very, very much for that. That was lovely. Again, if you are a member of the National Trust, please renew if you need to by tomorrow, and also, or join it, even better. And more power to Restore Trust.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure to talk to you about it. That's it for So What You're Saying Is. This week we shall be back next time. So see you then. Bye-bye. Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.